The Knights Templar, who had connections with the Grantham area, were soldiers of the Middle Ages. They were one of the most powerful Christian military orders and soon became the most feared and richest organisation in Europe. But with all their wealth and power, they were suddenly destroyed. I'm Helen Anderson, and I'm here today with Peter Ball from the South Witham Archeological Group. Peter has written a book on the Knights Templar at South Witham. Can you tell us, Peter, who the Knights Templars were?
Around about 1115, 1118, a Hugh de Payne and a Geoffrey St Omer and 7 other Flemish knights approached King Baldwin II of Jerusalem and asked that they become a monastic order. Now, Baldwin must have been quite a clever man, because he realised he couldn't afford to lose 9 fighting knights. One of the problems for the Crusades was, after they conquered the Holy Lands, a lot of the people who had gone out on the Crusades went home, leaving the place, to a certain extent, being just controlled by the castles that had been built and that owned those small areas. So it was bandit country all around. And he said, right, I can't afford to lose these guys, so why don't you stay knights but follow the monastic order of poverty, chastity and obedience? And so the archetypal fighting monk was born.
Where did they actually come from? Where did they get this band of monks from?
Well, like I said, it was only started as a very small organisation, 9 of them, 9 Flemish knights. And they got their name because they were given, their headquarters was in the stables of the Temple of Solomon. And what they did, they basically was an escort service. They would meet you at the port of Jaffa and they would escort you all the way around Jerusalem and all the holy sites, and their job was to protect you from basically being mugged. But they lived on whatever you gave them. So they were known as the poor fellow soldiers of Christ of the Temple of Solomon, reduced to the Templars.
They took a vow of poverty, which conflicts really with the fact that they became very, very rich and the most powerful organisation.
I think it's the old thing of, we see it even now, where you have these organisations where the members are poor but the organisation is rich. And it was one of these things, basically, if you joined the Templars, you were giving away all your money and your land to the Templars. In fact, one of their rules was that if, after you had died, they found that you had money on you, you were not to be buried in consecrated grounds and you were to be left outside for the dogs. In fact, the Irish Grand Master was caught embezzling money, and his punishment, they took him to London, they put him in a room, they sealed it up, just leaving a window so that they could give him water, and there he was left to starve to death.
So what does the Red Cross symbolise, Peter, the Red Cross that they have?
Well, see, they didn't have that at the start. They are originally an Augustinian order, which is the black and white monks. But very quickly they came under the wings of St Bernard of Clairvaux, and he was a leading Cistercian monk, and they were the white monks. So they didn't get the Red Cross until 1148, when they were made an actual military order by the Pope. And I think it's just a symbol of the cross. When people initially went on the crusade, when Pope Urban II called it, the way you showed you were going on the crusade was to stick a piece of red cloth as a cross on your chest to show that you had promised to go on the crusade.
Peter, there's a few legends that surround the Knights Templars. The Holy Grail, can you tell us about that?
Not 100% certain. We obviously see it in the Indiana Jones movies and this sort of thing. And then you get the thing that it's not necessarily the Grail of Christ, it could be the bloodline of Christ. But whether they are involved in that is one of the problems of the Knights Templars. If you went into a bookshop now and there was 100 books on the Knights Templars, 1 would be historical, 99 would be esoterical. It's that way. But certain things they did. The Turin Shroud is a classic example. When the Templars were suppressed and the Grand Master Jacques de Molay and the Treasurer de Cheney were roasted to death on a slow spit on an island in the Seine, 150 years after that, the Duchesne family were the ones who brought the Turin shroud out into view. And so everybody points that the Templars obviously had it. And possibly they did. You know, it's one of those sort of things. But there's lots of legends. It's like the Templars' treasury. When Philip the Fair of France suppressed the Templars under really dubious, false allegations to a certain extent, it was said that when he went to the treasury there, it was all gone. Well, there could be several reasons for that. One, yes, the Templars maybe knew it was coming and got it out. Two, it could be simply that they were now gone from a very rich organisation to a very poor. Because with the loss of the Holy Lands, they, to a certain extent, lost their reason for being. They were there to defend the Holy Lands. It had been lost. And this was why people were looking at them saying, well, what's the point of the Templars? They're not doing their job anymore. And they had been loaning money to everybody that they could. And they may have just used it all up.
That's the next question I was actually going to ask you, Peter. What actually led to their downfall? Because if you search through books on the internet, well, I certainly get the impression that they were betrayed, that they were dealing in dark arts, that they went from being these Christian monks to forgetting that they were fighting for God.
Well, I think the Templars were a classic example of, to a certain extent, what we see even now in clubs around this country. Membership are getting older and you're not getting anybody new in. And I think that was the Templars' problem. In one of the books, they worked it out that the average age of all the Templars that were arrested in France were in their 50s. Either that meant all the young people got away, or it was simply that they weren't able to get the young people in, the young blood, to keep the organisation going. There's always the thing about them saying that, of them spitting on the cross and things like this. But it's now coming of the opinion that that was actually probably true, but it was the thing of, when you joined the organisation, you swore to obey whatever the Grand Master told you to do. So if he told you to jump, you just ask how high, type thing. And that was one of the initiations to prove that you would obey him, that you would spit on the cross. If you would do that, you would prove anything.
Who appointed the Grand Master? How was he elected, chosen?
Every area had its Grand Master. So you had the overall Grand Master of the Templars. Then you would have had the Grand Master for England, Ireland, France and Germany and this sort of thing. And then the organisation went down to what we call preceptors or commanders, because in this country we call them preceptories. In France they were commanderies. And even then you could see that the organisation was having problems. If you go to France, they're often called twin commanderies. In other words, they only had one commander covering both. Very much like rectors and vicars nowadays, where they're starting to have more and more parishes. There's less and less rectors and vicars to take over, so you're going to control more and more of the area. South Witham is a good example. We know that in 1194 the king came, but by 1204 a William Revell of South Witham was having to collect his pension from a Temple brewer, what is called a corrodery. Whereas if there'd been a Templar at South Witham, he'd have been collecting it there. So by 1204, the site had become more probably run by a bailiff. We know that the 20 families who lived on the site had moved from the secondary hall into the main hall where the Templars would live, and had built a very large garderobe or toilet.
We'll have a look at the sites of interest in Lincolnshire that we've still got shortly. I'd like to just ask you, Peter, what do you think to the statement that the Knights Templars dissolved but were reborn as the Freemasons?
I would say against it, because Freemasons stay and believe that they can trace their ancestry to the people who built the Temple of Solomon. Some people claim, well, because the Templars were housed in the Temple of Solomon, they must be related. But that's like saying, you've gone and bought your house, you must be related to Barretts. There's no reason in the world.
So let's look at the links to Lincolnshire then. I know the Angel and Royal in Grantham is noted to be one of the hostels that was used by the Knights Templar. And we've obviously mentioned the two sites, Temple Brewer and South Witham, if you'd like to tell us a little bit about that.
5 major sites in this area of Lincolnshire, which is Eagle, Eastmere, Temple, South Witham and Aylesbury. Because Eastmere is what? And I can never remember which way round it is. I think Eastmere was the cavalry training camp and Eagle was the rehabilitation if you've been injured.
Where are these two places?
Towards Lincoln area. Aylesbury is going over towards the east. Obviously Temple Brewer is between Grantham and Lincoln. That's still got a tower standing from the round church. They had a double tower and you went between the tower and into the round church. Because a lot of people associate round churches with the Templars. It's not necessarily, it's a Crusader thing. It was to do with the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem is a round church. The one at Cambridge, round church, is Templar, but the one at Northampton is Crusader. And that was where the laity went into this round church. And then you had the chancel aspect to it. They were an interesting organisation. They brought a lot of things into this country. Isle barns they brought in from the Middle East. They introduced the word check into this country. They were like the Thomas Cooks of their era. If you wanted to, you could say, I want to go to the Overland. I'd nip down to South Witham, to the secretary there, and they'll say, oh, well, we've got a caravan going next week. We'll take you down to Dover, put you on our ships, we'll take you over there, escort you all around for a small fee, obviously. And if you want to, if you give us your money now, we'll give you a cheque, and when you get to the temple in Jerusalem, you can cash in this cheque. And so they had to do double entry bookkeeping because every year they had to balance their books. So these were very clever guys.
Peter, I'd like to ask you about the site at South Witham because I believe that's one of great historical interest.
Yeah, the site was dug between 1965 and 68 by Leeds University under Philip Mays. It was always known as Temple Hill. And so what it was, I think the Ministry of Work was paying the farmer to plough the field, the Ministry of Agriculture then paid him not to plough the field type thing. And so they had to dig. And they probably found one of the most important Templar sites in Europe. And it is a site that is unique because all the other Knight Templar sites, after the organisation had been suppressed, about 30 years later all their property was handed over to the Knight Hospitallers. And they generally carried on building and changing things until they were suppressed by Henry VIII. But the site at South Witham, when the Hospitallers got hold of it, it was recorded down as a messuage destructor. Basically, everybody had been in and nicked everything. Well, he probably built most of South Witham. And so it's been a sheep field ever since. Nothing's ever changed. It was a snapshot of 1308. So as a Templar site, it's unique. And the site itself was just really a large manorial property. So you've got 3 barns on the site, you've got your pigsties, you've got your workshops, your dairies, your kitchen, the secondary hall where the families lived, the great hall for the Templars, the garde-robes. Their main difference is they've got a chapel, because the Templars were allowed by the Pope to have their own chaplains. One of their sayings was, some pray, some fight, some work. So the priests do the praying, the soldiers do the fighting, and your serfs work your land. So that was one of their sayings as such. And I don't know if people know what the garde-robe is.
No.
Which is the toilets, latrine. And it comes from the belief that if you hung your robe above the latrines, the vapours coming off there will kill the lice in your robes. So these guys obviously smelled quite now, yeah. When the Templars were suppressed, obviously the main rumours are the treasury. Did they escape? As we said, most of the people who were captured were in their 50s or above. So did the young men know about the situation and get away? Because one of the rumours is that the Templar fleet had sailed from France and that they went to Scotland, and Roslin, the Sinclair family who were members of the Templars and this sort of thing were able to get the treasury there. Whether it's true, there's lots of contention, and this is where your Dan Browns and all this sort of stories come from, that the Templars are still going. And to a certain extent, the Knights Templars are still going in some form in this country, but a lot of it is the Victorian revivals. They revived the Round Table, the Templars and all these sort of organisations that had died out. But in Europe, it can be argued the Templars are going. When the order came out for the Templars to be arrested and suppressed, the King of Portugal told the Pope, "I've arrested all the Templars, I've started a new organisation known as the Knights of Christ, and it's run by all the ex-Templars." And that organisation is still going to this day. So there is a Templar organisation still doing the same thing. In this country, the only real thing that the Templars were found guilty of was that the Grand Master forgiving sins. Because he wasn't ordained, he couldn't do that. And so what happened to most of them was they were either pensioned off or they joined other monastic orders. Whereas in France, slightly different, the Templars rallied against the king and were actually putting up a good legal case against him. So he had 50 of them burnt at the stakes, and that sort of shut him up.
It looked like it would.
Well, yeah, it tended to, and that's why the Grand Master and De Cheney were burnt or roasted to death on the slow spit because they recanted their confessions. So you've got to remember, in medieval times, if you were a heretic and you confessed to it, that was it, you can go. But if you get caught doing it again, then I can burn you at the stakes. And that was the system. But as long as you said, "Sorry, I've got it wrong, I won't do it again," you could go.
So you didn't get the 3 strikes and you're out then?
No, you got 1 strike and you were out.
Peter, you've talked about Jacques de Molay being roasted on the spit. I heard that he made a curse.
Yes, it's said that as he was being roasted alive, that he cursed the king and the Pope, saying that within a year they would stand before God for their crimes. And lo and behold, they both did. They both were dead within that year, but they were both in their 60s, which in medieval times was pretty reasonable. And I believe the king died when his horse put its foot down a rabbit hole and he went over his neck and broke his neck. There wasn't something that unusual. Spittle in the Street was a Templar hospitium.
A Templar what?
Hospitalium. Well, we say hospital. Originally, it was for hospitality. It was basically your youth hostel. It was somewhere to stop when you were travelling around. But what ended up was that the people who stopped were often ill. And so the Templars and all these organisations would look after them. And so an hospitalium eventually became an hospital. So that's really where our term for hospital comes from. And the Knights Hospitallers, who were the other side of the to the Templars. So you had the Templars were in the white with a red cross. Knights Hospitallers were in the black with a white cross, because one was the Cistercian, the other was the Augustinian. These two organisations, you would class, they were the elite fighting force of the Crusades. Whereas the other knights were, there's the enemy, they just charged off. Over there, you weren't allowed to move until your Grand Master said go. And so they were the shock troops. The forces they were meeting were basically cavalry, but cavalry archers and that. They were light cavalry, where you were looking at knights who were fully armoured with lance and this sort of thing. They were shock troops. So quite often a small number of knights could defeat quite a large number of light cavalry. But if they got it wrong, they could be surrounded and literally picked off. But the Hospitallers and the Templars, you could almost argue that they were like the SAS and Commandos. And there were two elite fighting forces, and there's lots of records that whenever they met, they always got into a fight. Now, you can imagine, if the SAS and the Commandos go into a pub, it's going to end up in a fight, isn't it? And they were very much that sort of organisation.
So, on the whole, would you say the Knights Templars were the good guys?
I think like any organisation, they had their good and their bad. I think that sort of thing. They were a unit for their time. They started something, this idea of a fighting monk. Whether that was good or bad is for history to decide. But for their period, they were one of the most important things until eventually they lost the Holy Lands. But see, the Hospitallers, even though we lost the Holy Lands, they carried on fighting. They first went to Rhodes, where they carried on attacking with their ships and basically doing small landings, attack things, disappear. They were then forced out all the way to Malta, where they stayed until Napoleon got rid of them. So they were there a long time in charge of Malta. Again, they were attacking all along the Barbary coast and this sort of thing.
Pete, could you tell us about the Ark of the Covenant and the association for that with the Knights Templar?
The Ark of the Covenant is where they found things when they were digging there. On the Crusades, when the Crusaders captured Antioch, they were then besieged by Saladin, and they were in trouble until somebody very luckily found the Holy Lance that pierced Christ's side, and they ran outside and beat the Turks. A lot of things occurred that you don't know how much credence to give to it.
We mentioned, Peter, the Angel and Royal in Grantham, which was originally established as a hostel by the Knights Templars. Have you got any information on that you could further?
Obviously, we know that the Royal came because the King came Victorian time, or was it Edward? I'm not certain which king it was. But the Angel, is seen, was quite a common name for Templar pubs. We've got an Angel in South Witham, whether it's related. The George in Stamford was a Templar pub, and its original name was the Angel. What most people don't realise is that the Templars owned a lot of businesses. In fact, that often caused most of the records that are kept about the Templars is to do with litigation, where some lord is complaining that the Templars have took so-and-so under their wings, so he ain't getting his money, then this guy's paying less taxes, basically, to the Templars. They controlled a lot of these sort of pubs and places around here, so the Angel is a common name. And their churches were often John the Baptist or Mary Magdalene was the common name, and at South Witham it is John the Baptist Church.
Peter, I've heard that there's a site at Burton Lazars.
Yes, that was the headquarters of the Knights of Lazarus. Basically, if you were a knight, you caught leprosy, you joined this organisation. This was the main headquarters in the UK. From all accounts, lepers weren't there. That leprosy hospital was at Tilton-on-the-Hill. Just round here, we're Grantham, is it Spittlegate Hill, was a leper hospital. It's a big monastic property. We did a resistivity work on there, and you could see quite clearly the place itself with its chapter house and courtyard and all that. All the buildings are there still to this day. Very interesting site, because it's got a medieval manor house on there and a old Neolithic trackway running through the site as well. But as I said, these guys were there basically look after the leprosy side of it.
Leprosy was very common?
I don't know whether it's very common, but one of the things that has changed, Dr. David Markham of Nottingham University has in the last few years done a book that showed that leprosy, when we think of the van going around ringing the bell saying unclean, that was not to tell you to stay away from him, that was to go and touch him, because he was believed to be serving purgatory on earth. The medieval belief was that when you died, you would go to purgatory, you spent so much time in purgatory before you went to heaven. But somebody who got leprosy was serving that. As soon as they died, they were going to go straight to heaven. They were more holier than that. And it was really only with the Black Death that the perceptions changed and people avoided anybody with diseases.
What actually is leprosy?
I believe there's two types of leprosy. There's the one where you basically lose the feelings in your extremities, and the one which is more serious where you actually start to lose your extremities. I suppose very much in like diabetes, where you can start to lose the circulation, and I think a lot of it is to do with the thing that because you can't feel with your extremities, if you damage them, you don't know you've damaged them. I know one of the Crusader kings, they spotted he had leprosy because he put his hand in a fire to pick something out. and didn't
feel
it. And it was often picked up at a very young age. They would pick up that you've got leprosy. And it's one of these diseases that they still don't really know a lot about. You can work with lepers your whole life and never catch it, and then sometimes it runs through families, and
and people wanted to touch the lepers because they thought it would make them more holy.
Yes, because this was an holy person. It's a bit like the people trying to touch the robes of Christ in the Bible. They were touching a holy man. Maybe it will give them healing and this sort of thing.
Temple Brewer, is it worth visiting?
Yes. It's a little awkward to get to because you have to actually go through the farmer's yard, but you can park in there. It's very good because you've still got a tower from the period still standing. And if you go inside, there is a base of a coffin there, which is basically worn away. If you ever get a chance to go to South Witham Church, behind the organ there is a stone coffin lid, which is probably from the Templar site of South Witham, and it was used as a bridge over the River Witham from about 1500 to about 1905. Laid face down with wooden planks on it, and so it's never been worn away, and it's dated between 1250 and 1350. We know on the site at South Witham there is a wedge-shaped coffin but no lid, and we've got a lid that would probably fit that in the church, so it's a very interesting one.
So at the site of South Witham, would that have been a family? Would they all have lived there?
There probably only ever 1 or 2 nights on the site. It's recorded down in what they call 20 family, so there was 20 men working on the site with their family. So you're probably looking at that day, the wives and maybe 4 or 5 children, so probably well over 100 people working the site, and they'll be doing the things like your ploughman, the man who kept the pigsty, and so on, your stables, your blacksmith. So it was basically a manorial property, and we know that I think 76 people owed the Templars 4 days' work from the village of South Witham every year. And what they would do is that they would call them in, usually when the harvest needed collecting, because that's when you want the most manpower. And your payment for doing this was so much beer, because it was not safe to drink the water, so everything was brewed, so everybody had beer. The first brew was for men, second brew of the same thing was for ladies, and the third brew, little beer or small beer, was for children. So you were given so much beer, so much bread, and a £7 cheese. So basically your ploughman's lunch for doing this work. I think the King's Keeper records that when he took over the Knights Templar site at South Witham, there was 111 £7 cheeses in the storeroom. So it's quite a lot.
If anybody wanted to find out more about the Knights Templar, you've written a little book. Can you just tell us quickly about that?
Well, I did a book on the Knights Templars at South Witham. Our organisation, South Witham Archeological Group, formed in 1998 because the dig had been done in 65 to 68, but the report still wasn't out. And so Mary Moore in the village was battering English Heritage every week to say, is the report been done yet? Is the report? And eventually they brought the report out in 2002. At the same time I brought my book out on it.
That is some gap.
It was some gap. And from what I gather, there is still some reports that have still not been done from the 60s. And it wasn't that the reports had been put together. They'd been done in the early 70s, they were ready, it just never been published. And the people who eventually published the report, Medieval Monographs, the guy there said, I thought I'd go back and update it from some of the people who had done the reports, and like 8 people had done it. He said, but the problem was, 4 of them were dead. It's not like Times Team now, where all of them are in their 20s. In the 60s, most archaeologists would be in their 40s or 50s. So you wait 35 years, there's a good chance they're going to be not around.
Have you got copies of the book still available?
Yes, the South Witham Archeological Group always keeps copies of the Knights Templar at South Witham, with all the other books that we've done on the villages and that.
Yeah. So if anybody wanted any more information, they can contact Peter Ball. Just Google for South Witham Archeological Group.
Yeah, and I do go around giving talks to different groups on the Templars and that sort of thing.
Lovely.
Anybody's interested.
Well, it's been lovely to talk to you, Peter. I hope you've enjoyed coming here today.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your time, Peter.
Thank you.